CNN's Miles O'Brien is following their mission and joins us now from the Johnson Space Center. Hello, Miles.
Hello, Fanula. Astronauts Jerry Ross and Jim Newman are ahead of schedule once again, about 30 minutes ahead of schedule. Their spacewalk number 2 is underway. It's about 45 minutes old right now, and right now what those astronauts are doing are setting up their tools for what is to be a 6.5-hour spacewalk. Among the items they are checking out is a foot restraint, which goes on the end of the 50-foot robotic arm, which will be the essentially turned into a cherry picker. Astronaut Jim Newman will be working from that. Newman was the first to pop out of the hatch. He and his fellow weightless working stiff, Jerry Ross, got right to it, didn't waste any time. On top of their list of tasks, installing a pair of antennas on opposite sides of the U.S. piece of the International Space Station, the so-called Unity Connecting Node. Now, those antennas will make it possible for NASA to send and receive data from that fledgling space station nearly seamlessly. Without it, they would have to rely on the Russian ground stations, and that greatly limits the amount of time they can communicate with the spacecraft. Now, later in the spacewalk, they will move toward the Russian piece of the 77-foot space station. That Russian piece called Zarya, it's a power plant and a communications module. One of the antennas on it, which is an antenna used to operate a backup guidance system for docking spacecraft, did not unfurl. The astronauts will use what is essentially a boat hook to try to poke and prod it to make it deploy. That attempt will come a little later in this spacewalk. They will also be installing some insulation on Unity as well as a sunshade on an external computer. And at the rate they've been going on the previous spacewalk and so far this evening, it's quite possible they will do some so-called get-ahead tasks, added work, because they're working so quickly. Now, this second spacewalk is a precursor for an important milestone for the history of the International Space Station. Tomorrow, the Unity Zarya combination will be heated up and pressurized, and the crew of Endeavour will step across the threshold with tools in hand. They will begin taking apart structures and bolts which were there, make the spacecraft safe for launch, and they will be the first visitors to the International Space Station. Miles O'Brien, CNN, reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, Houston. Fanula?
Thanks very much indeed, Miles.
Anderen haben ihren zweiten Arbeitseinsatz begonnen. Sie verließen die Raumfähre Endeavour, um am amerikanischen Teil 2 Antennen anzubringen. Sie werden die Verbindung zur Bodenkontrolle in Houston herstellen. Danach kümmern sich die Raumfahrer um die beiden klemmenden Navigationsantennen am russischen Modul. Anfang der Woche waren die beiden ersten Teile der Raumstation miteinander verbunden worden.
Rumschweben, haben ihre Raumfähre verlassen. Sie basteln in diesem Moment an der technischen Ausrüstung der Internationalen Weltraumstation, 400 Kilometer über der Erde. Danach wollen sie zum ersten Mal in diese Station einsteigen.
The astronauts on the space shuttle Endeavour are back at work. The mission attaching a pair of communications antennas. CNN's Miles O'Brien is standing by at the Johnson Space Center in Texas. Miles.
Leon, astronauts Jim Newman and Jerry Ross are now nearly 3 hours into their second spacewalk on this first construction mission for the International Space Station. Let's take a look at some live pictures from space, 250 miles above the surface, traveling across the Pacific Ocean. The Space Shuttle Endeavour cargo bay is the shot you should be seeing. And in the foreground there is Jim Newman, who is restrained at the end of the 50-foot robotic arm of the Space Shuttle Endeavour, using it sort of like a cherry picker for this particular spacewalk. Beside him to the right, astronaut Jerry Ross, who on this first spacewalk of this mission broke the cumulative record for U.S. spacewalks of 29 hours and 41 minutes. What they're attempting to do right now is attach a pair of antennas which will allow the embryonic space station to communicate with NASA's nearly seamless satellite communication system. Without those antennas, ground controllers would have to rely on passes over Russian ground stations, providing sporadic communication at best. So far, this spacewalk has gone like clockwork. You may recall on spacewalk number 1, the spacewalkers were outside for 7 hours and 21 minutes. This time around, here at Mission Control, they're going to limit it to the 6 hours and 30 minutes planned. They don't want the spacewalkers to overdo it, much like a weekend athlete would. Miles O'Brien, CNN, reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, Houston.
Astronauten Ross und Newman stiegen aus der Raumfähre Endeavour aus, um an dem amerikanischen Teil der Station 2 Antennen anzubringen. 6,5 Stunden dauerte der Einsatz mit der guten Aussicht. Zeit genug, um auch noch die beiden klemmenden Antennen des russischen Moduls wieder funktionsfähig zu machen.
Endeavour hatten in der vergangenen Nacht ihren zweiten Arbeitseinsatz an der Weltraumstation ISS. Die Amerikaner Ross und Newman waren mehr als 7 Stunden beschäftigt. Sie brachten Antennen für die Überwachung des Verbindungsknotens der beiden Module Unity und Salya an. Außerdem entfernten sie die Schutzschilde der Einstiegsluken. Heute werden die Astronauten zum ersten Mal in die Unity hineingehen und testen, ob die Videokommunikation funktioniert.
The astronauts on the Space Shuttle Endeavour were awakened Tuesday afternoon to begin Flight Day 6 of their 12-day mission, a day which began with giving an orbital boost to the International Space Station, rising almost 80 feet from its berth on the shuttle's orbiter docking system. The solar arrays on the Zarya control module vibrated as Commander Bob Cabana and pilot Rick Sturckow pulsed the shuttle's primary reaction control system thrusters repeatedly over a 22-minute period to raise the overall altitude of their orbit by 3.5 statute miles, so the station will be at the proper altitude for the planned arrival of the service module next summer. During the reboost, the astronauts and mission managers on the ground watched as the station reacted to the thrust from the shuttle's jets. Cabana discussed the maneuver during an interview Tuesday afternoon.
The orbiter, anytime it fires its large RCS thrusters, we're talking 800 pounds of thrust. It's a real kick, especially after you've been in 0G for a while. You really feel the acceleration. And when you've got masses as large as the FGB and Unity attached to the orbiter, sticking out, it shifts your center of G. So the whole stack would swing just a little bit, maybe about 6 inches of movement at its furthest point as the thrust was applied.
In discussing Monday's spacewalk, when mission specialists Jerry Ross and Jim Newman made a series of electrical and data cable connections between Zarya and the connecting node called Unity, both pilot Sturckow, who coordinated the activity from onboard Endeavour, and mission specialist Nancy Curry, who operated the shuttle's robot arm, said that their tasks were made easier thanks to the long training period that this crew enjoyed.
It was a little challenging at times. I'd start off by saying that we've been training for that spacewalk for more than 2 years. So I was very familiar with every step of the procedures. What made it different was, as you probably picked up on, is we had to make some changes on the fly and incorporate some inspections of the FGB Toru antennas, and we were also able to get ahead and do some VVA2 tasks. So that was quite a challenge to make sure that we hadn't left anything out and that we carefully inventoried all the tools and got everything handled.
Well, again, like Rick said, we've been training for this for a long time, and interestingly enough, real life turned out to be simpler than in training. We had some limitations in our water tank where we never could train with it, where we could look out the windows and actually see the arm. We had to train with it in a completely different configuration, kind of lying on its side in the pool. So we were remarking several times during the EVA yesterday how much easier it was in real life. About the only challenge was as we went into the dark periods, it was sometimes difficult to keep track of the distances between the arm or the crew member on the end of the arm, and so we were having them make distance calls constantly throughout the EVA.
Curry said that using the 50-foot-long robot arm to move the 22-ton control module to its mating with Unity was not as difficult as it was time-consuming. She was asked if doing the job made her nervous.
If I didn't admit that I was a little bit nervous, I'd be lying. So I think everybody on the crew is a little bit nervous, and that's probably pretty good too, because that just makes us all the more cautious.
How are you feeling at the moment? Any of you?
We're feeling outstanding. We've still got a lot ahead of us, but it really feels good to have everything we need for mission success under our belt. It's really been an outstanding flight.
On Tuesday evening, Cabana and his crew took advantage of a scheduled half-day off-duty to relax and to look out the windows at both the Earth below and the space station above them in Endeavour's payload bay, the second of 3 planned spacewalks to install components of an early communications system and other pieces of hardware is slated to begin a few hours after the astronauts are awakened Wednesday morning. When Flight Day 7 dawned on board the Space Shuttle Endeavour Wednesday morning, the 6 crew members moved immediately into preparations for a second spacewalk outside the International Space Station. Mission specialists Jerry Ross and Jim Newman again donned the special liquid cooling garments, which allow adjustment of temperatures inside their spacesuits, before pilot Rick Sturko and mission specialist Sergei Krikalev moved in to help the spacewalkers into their bulky spacesuits. After a period of breathing pure oxygen to purge nitrogen from their bloodstreams, Ross and Newman waited for the shuttle's airlock to depressurize. The spacewalkers exited the airlock about half an hour ahead of schedule Wednesday afternoon, and as was the case during their first spacewalk on Monday, they first staged the various tools and tethers they would need for the day's work. With Newman in the foot restraint on the end of the robot arm, the 2 men began laying out cables along the 2 modules for the station's early communications system. Then they moved to the starboard and port docking ports of Unity and removed hatch pins and covers from the berthing points for the 2 communication system antennas. With the sights prepared, the spacewalkers went back to the airlock, retrieved the 2 bulky antenna units, and then returned to mount them on the sides of Unity. The system, which is to be tested when the crew enters the station Thursday afternoon, is designed to permit Mission Control in Houston to send commands to the station. Along with removing a series of launch restraint pins from the common berthing mechanisms on Unity's port and starboard hatches, Ross and Newman erected a sunshade over the command routing computer on pressurized mating adapter number 1. That computer, on the side of the module which will be pointed away from the Earth, will be subject to high temperatures when the station is in sunlight. Next up for the spacewalking construction workers, installing thermal covers on the trunnion pins which held Unity in place in the payload bay during launch to prevent the loss of heat from inside the module via that path. Then Ross and Newman went back to the airlock once again, this time to retrieve a special 10-foot pole for a special job. During activation of Zarya following its launch last month, 2 antennas for its backup docking system failed to deploy. Newman's task? Use the hook on the end of the pole to try to get one of those antennas to unspool. With mission specialist Nancy Curry at the controls of the shuttle's robot arm, Newman was positioned a safe distance from the antenna. Then Commander Bob Cabana gave Newman the okay to proceed.
Okay, Jim, you got to go to give a tug below the brown band there lightly.
Great. It may not fit, just so you know that, going in from this side.
Understand.
Moving. Okay, it does move, and it does not jump back. Correct. It's like the spring wasn't working. Okay, Houston, it moves, and it doesn't spring back. It feels like it will deploy if I continue a gentle pull. Slow that thing now.
After consultation with managers on the ground, Newman was given a go to try again.
Good and bad news. It's fully up, but it didn't pop.
So it's locked in the 90-degree position, right?
Affirmative.
Okay, stay clear.
The astronauts and flight controllers in Houston were still considering their options when...
There it goes. Gone. Yep, it's gone. Didn't pass over the timer.
Hey, congratulations, crew. You got her deployed. All right, good to see.
I blinked and missed it. I hope the camera caught it. It went straight up. I wonder why the delay. I think it just took it. Maybe it needed to heat up or something in the sun. Yep, who knows?
With the main objectives of the day achieved, Ross and Newman began packing their tools into the shuttle's airlock, ending the second of 3 planned excursions on this 12-day flight. Along with the achievement of completing the planned tasks during the 7-hour and 2-minute-long spacewalk, Endeavour's astronauts also captured some majestic images of the new station against the backdrop of the Earth. Spacecraft communicator Chris Hadfield called attention to one such image Wednesday evening.
Endeavour Houston, Jerry, it looks like you're standing on a mountaintop.
Tremendous view, Chris.
As the mission passed its halfway point, the astronauts on Endeavour prepared for sleep, looking ahead to another station milestone on Thursday, when they are to become the first people ever to enter the International Space Station on orbit.
Open
At the start of the week, the crew of the Shuttle Endeavour began the process of assembling the International Space Station. Linking the first two modules has taken astronauts outside the shuttle on spacewalks, but now the astronauts are moving inside the new space station. Over the next 2 days, they will install a communication system and will load supplies and tools for use in future missions. It will take over 40 missions to complete the $60 billion orbiting laboratory. Well, now let's take a quick check.
U.S. astronaut Robert Cabana and Russian cosmonaut Sergei Krikalev were the first to enter the International Space Station on Thursday. For the next day or so, they'll be busy installing equipment and transferring items from the Space Shuttle Endeavour.
Männer von der Raumstation ISS haben gute Arbeit geleistet. Das amerikanische Modul Unity ist angeschlossen und der erste kann sozusagen das Licht anmachen bzw. die Computer testen. Und siehe da, es hat hingehauen. Vielleicht kommt daher ja der Wunsch, auf der Erde manchen Hand- und Heimwerker aus Verzweiflung auf den Mond zu schießen. Ralf Vogelsrath über Erfolgserlebnisse im All.
Das Weglied an diesem Tag war vielleicht nicht ganz passend. Ich bin stolz, Amerikaner zu sein, schallte es aus Houston über die Radiowellen zur Shuttle Endeavour. Eigentlich ist der Bau der neuen Raumstation ja eine internationale Angelegenheit, aber wenn Geschichte geschrieben wird, nimmt der amerikanische Nationalstolz wohl überhand. Die Astronauten nahmen ein kurzes Frühstück zu sich und wenig später war man bei der Arbeit. Langsam und vorsichtig wurde die Verbindung von der Raumfähre zur neuen Raumstation hergestellt. Mit einem Schlauch musste erst einmal der Luftdruck zwischen Fähre und Station ausgeglichen werden. Die benutzten Schraubenschlüssel wurden sorgfältig wieder in einem Sack verstaut. Man nahm das Handbuch zur Hilfe und wenig später kam der historische Moment. Die Luke wurde geöffnet. Der russische Kosmonaut Sergei Krikalev und der amerikanische Shuttle-Kommandant Robert Cabana drängten sich zugleich durch die Luke, wohl um das unpassende Weglied vergessen zu machen. Gemeinsam mit der Taschenlampe in der Hand betraten sie als erste Menschen die neue internationale Raumstation, um buchstäblich den Lichtschalter zu suchen. Aber in diesem Moment fiel der Funkkontakt aus. Als der Kontakt 7 Minuten später über Russland wiederhergestellt war, war das Licht schon an. Es ist unglaublich. Sergei hüpft wie ein Verrückter herum. Wir sind so froh und stolz, sagte der amerikanische Astronaut. Das war der Höhepunkt der Shuttle-Mission und der endgültige Test für die Fähigkeiten der Weltraumklempner. Seit Montag hatten die Astronauten bei mehrstündigen Weltraumausflügen die beiden Module der neuen Raumstation zusammengebaut. Erst gestern hatten sie die Kabel verbunden. Es sieht aus, als ob ihr auf einem Berggipfel steht, hatte sie die Bodenkontrolle geneckt. Wir stehen auf dem Gipfel der Welt, kam die Antwort aus dem All. Aber was so mühelos aussah, war in Wirklichkeit harte Arbeit. Jedes Werkzeug war per Kabel mit dem Shuttle verbunden, damit die Teile nicht ins All flogen. Aber eine Wärmeisolierung, der kleine Lichtpunkt links im Bild, machte sich doch davon und verschwand in den Weiten des Alls. Alle 45 Minuten reisten Shuttle und Raumstation durch die Nachtseite des Erdschattens. Dann arbeiteten die Astronauten einfach bei Scheinwerferlicht weiter. Unterbezahlt und überarbeitet, nannte einer der Astronauten dann scherzhaft seinen Job. Doch die Aussicht hier oben machte die Anstrengung vergessen. Und heute kam die große Belohnung. Am Ende eines langen Tages wurde noch die Verbindung zum russischen Steuerungsmodul Zarija geöffnet. Einen historischen Moment nannte das der amerikanische Shuttle-Kommandant. Der Anfang der internationalen Raumstation, in der Staaten von der ganzen Erde zusammenarbeiten sollten, wurde beim Gruppenbild im All beschworen. Damit war die neue internationale Raumstation offiziell in Betrieb genommen und die Zukunft der Raumfahrt, das 21. Jahrhundert, konnte beginnen.
Nachdem sie 6 Luken zwischen Endeavour und Unity geöffnet hatten, kehrten sie in die angedockte Raumfähre zurück. Die gesamte Endeavour-Besatzung feierte anschließend mit einem Gruppenfoto den erfolgreichen Ausflug in die neue Raumbasis.
When the astronauts on board Space Shuttle Endeavour were awakened for Flight Day 8 on Thursday morning, they moved right into an activity that many people have waited to see for years. The first entrance of a crew onto the International Space Station, rising almost 8 stories from its berth on the shuttle's orbiter docking system. Commander Bob Cabana joined mission specialists Jerry Ross and Sergei Krikalev in the docking area outside the hatch into pressurized mating adapter number 2. With all systems prepared, the American commander and the Russian cosmonaut opened the hatch. Together, they were the first people to enter the International Space Station. Just minutes later, after the astronauts moved more equipment into position inside the PMA, they opened the forward hatch on the connecting node called Unity, and the American and the Russian, again in tandem, entered this module of the station. Their crewmates followed on shortly before Cabana offered a few words for the occasion.
This was just an absolutely super place. It's unbelievable. If you got live coverage, look at the volume Sergei is floating around in. We are so pleased and excited and proud to be a part of the team that made this happen. And our special thanks to all the ISS folks, all their hard work. We remember when Unity was just an aluminum shell, and it is a truly fine piece of hardware. And just thanks to everybody in the space station program for all their hard work.
The astronauts worked for about an hour to set up life support and other systems on Unity until it was time to take the next step. Cabana and Krikalev opened the hatch from pressurized mating adapter number 1 and entered the first chamber of Zarya, the Russian-built control module, which was the first element of the station to reach orbit. And then they opened the final hatch, leading to the main portion of the module. Within minutes, Cabana had gathered the entire crew inside Zarya.
Well, Houston, from the deepest part of the International Space Station from Endeavour, we'd just like to take a moment to commemorate an historic moment in space exploration, the beginning of the International Space Station, where countries from all over the world are exploring together in space for everyone's benefit, exploration that's going to take us beyond the confines of low Earth orbit, where we're going to learn to work together and do everything that we possibly can to expand our knowledge in all areas of science.
The astronauts went right to work, laying air ducting throughout the station and removing launch restraints. At one point, Krikalev, who is assigned as flight engineer on the first crew to permanently inhabit the station, went to the aft end of Zarya for a flight test.
Sergei. Looks like home. What do you think?
They are small yet. We need to add more modules.
In the meantime, Cabana and Ross were at work completing installation of the early communication system in the Unity module, permitting communication to and from mission control in Houston, even when the station is out of range of Russian ground stations. Krikalev and mission specialist Jim Newman tested that link to the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston, where station communicator Lisa Nowak was joined by astronaut Bill Shepard, who as commander of the first station expedition crew will be Krikalev's crewmate on orbit in early 2000.
Jim, I'd just like to congratulate the whole crew. It's really a historic day. It's a great thing watching you guys go up there and make some history. I'd just like to point out that you guys are all now plank owners. You're going to have to talk to Bob or Rick and have them explain that to you. And a special honor, Sergei and Nancy are now bilge divers. So they're bilge divers and plank owners in the same day. That's quite an accomplishment.
Привет еще раз. Glad to hear you.
Good to see you up there. I'm real glad we had you on board today.
Inside Zarya, Krikalev and mission specialist Nancy Curry removed a battery charging unit which had experienced a problem discharging stored energy, and they replaced it with a new unit. Russian flight controllers later reported the new unit was operating properly. Gathered with his crewmates in the Unity module Thursday evening, Cabana offered a quick look around and discussed the remaining work of the mission as Endeavour's crew conducted the first ever interview from the new station.
Right now we're in the Unity module, and it's the first U.S.-built piece, and it's a connecting piece between all the other modules. Around us are 4 radial ports, and then the 2 axial ports on either end. The space shuttle docks at this end where the camera is, and if these guys will duck down behind me, you can look on through and see into Zarya, the first Russian-built piece for the International Space Station. So it's a small beginning, but from small beginnings, great things come. Well, we still have some more work to do inside the space station. We cleaned it up a little bit for this PAO event. So a little more work inside, still configuring. We still have another challenging spacewalk ahead of us, 2 satellites to deploy, and then we got to make sure everything's right and we come home safely. So still a lot ahead of us on this flight.
Work on board to set up the International Space Station continued into Friday morning before the astronauts were sent to sleep. They'll return to those tasks on Flight Day 9 before closing the hatches to the station for the final time on this mission on Friday afternoon.
This is Mission Control with just over 2 hours remaining until Endeavour's crew is awakened at 10:36 this morning. Flight controllers in the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston, as well as flight controllers in the Space Shuttle Flight Control Room just down the hall, are continuing their work in preparing messages, information, and revisions to the timeline that will guide Endeavour's crew through its 9th day on orbit. Space Station Flight Director Jeff Hanley and Space Station Capcom, or Spacecraft Communicator Mike Fink, are on duty this morning in the Space Station Flight Control Room. This is a new room that just became permanently staffed, beginning with Unity's launch in the payload bay of Endeavour on December 4th from the Kennedy Space Center. Flight control of the Zarya module and the space station is conducted from locations in both the United States and in Russia. NASA retains primary oversight for all operations. The primary command and control function for the Zarya module is at the Zarya Flight Control Room in Korolyov, Russia, just outside Moscow, using the Russian communications system. The Zarya Flight Control Room is located in the same building as the Mir Flight Control Room has been located, and it is staffed by flight controls from the Khrushchev State Research and Production Space Center in Moscow, which built the Zarya module. NASA's flight control operations are maintaining oversight and approving all plans, while the Russian flight control team directs real-time space station operations based on those approved plans. The station flight control team in Houston also will be supporting Russian flight controllers as they perform command and control over the U.S. systems. Once the U.S. laboratory module Destiny is delivered to the space station on shuttle mission STS-88 in February of the year 2000, Station Flight Control in Houston then will assume the direction of real-time flight operations activities, and it will have primary command and control functions using the primary U.S. communications system. NASA does have a small flight control team known as the Houston Support Group working in Korolyov to facilitate communications and information exchange between Houston and Korolyov. Once it's fully staffed, the Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston will contain about a dozen flight controllers led by the International Space Station Flight Director. During early station operations, when there are no highly dynamic activities planned, staffing in the Station Flight Control Room may be reduced. After shuttle mission STS-87, 1 year from now in December 1999, the Station Mission Control Center will be permanently staffed by a full flight control team when this is necessary, and by a duty officer when there is no dynamic activity going on. The new station flight control room is just down the hall from the Space Shuttle Flight Control Room in the Johnson Space Center's Mission Control Center. Preparations are ongoing this morning by the planning shift of flight controllers that has been on duty since 4:30 this morning as they make their final plans to be uplinked to the crew, as the crew members will be awakened in just under 2 hours for their 9th day of on-orbit activities. Activities today will focus on completing many of the tasks that were begun yesterday, including transfer of supplies and materials from Endeavour to the space station, and those supplies and materials will be left on board the space station for use by future crews. Crew is expected to make its final departure from the Zarya module at about 3:51 Central Time this afternoon, closing up the hatches behind them, and then egressing the Unity module shortly after 5:30 Central Time. Space station's hatches will remain secured until visit by the next station assembly crew, which is set for next spring.
With a full week in space under their belts, the 6 astronauts on board the Shuttle Endeavour were roused Friday morning with a familiar theme from Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker Suite, which spacecraft communicator Robert Kerbeam sent as wake-up music especially for mission specialist Sergei Krikalev.
Доброе утро, Сергей Константинович и Endeavour.
Доброе утро. Good morning, everybody.
Starting their closeouts inside the International Space Station, Krikalev and mission specialist Nancy Curry began work in Zarya, using a pair of power tools to remove more of the launch restraints inside the Russian-built control module, and checking its filters while ensuring that the air ducting was properly placed. Commander Bob Cabana sent his crew's compliments to the builders.
In Houston and Moscow, we mentioned yesterday how fine all the workmanship was on all the space stations, and we just wanted to, again, now that we're inside Zarya, thank the folks at Kunishev for all their hard work, and our friend Sergei Shievich. We really appreciate everything that they did. It's a fine vehicle.
Once all systems were properly configured and the lights inside Zarya turned off, Cabana and Krikalev closed the hatch on the control module's main chamber. A short time later, after atmospheric pressures had been stabilized, they also closed the hatch on Zarya's docking chamber. The astronauts then concentrated on final preparations to close up the Unity connecting node, and Cabana conducted a video survey of the module to document the conditions that the second assembly crew will find when they step on board the station next year. Early Friday evening, with concurrence from the International Space Station flight control teams, Mission Control in Houston gave Cabana the go-ahead to close the hatch on Unity. A few hours later, the astronauts also closed the hatch from the shuttle's orbiter docking system into pressurized mating adapter number 2, completing their work inside the new space station. In an interview Friday evening, Cabana was asked his opinion of the value of the space station that he's helping to construct.
Well, I think it's a learning ground for one thing. If we're going to have long-duration spaceflight, we have to really understand how the human body behaves in space for long periods of time. We're going to learn that, but I think more importantly, it's the international cooperative effort. Space is for everyone, and we're working together, having built an international space station to bring all of us together for the benefit of everyone. And we're going to use this experience, we're going to grow with it, and it's going to help us get back to the moon and Mars.
Mission specialist Jerry Ross, who has launched into space a record-tying 6 times and spent more hours walking in space than any other American, and his spacewalking partner on this flight, mission specialist Jim Newman, were asked why they accept the risks of this space station assembly task.
I don't think any great steps forward in mankind's history have been without some risk, and I think this is part of a great step forward. We're just in the infancy of the exploration of space and the uses of space, and I really strongly believe that the International Space Station will provide scientists from around the world with day in and day out microgravity research capability that will lead to many, many benefits for every human being on the surface of the Earth.
I think that's a valid question, and in particular now, since on my first flight I was single and now I have a wife and a couple of kids, I do ask myself that question. But I feel that, as Jerry said, in order to make strides in for all of our country and for the world, that some risks are appropriate. And going into space is something that, although it's risky, it's managed risk. There are a lot of people who work very hard all around the world in order to make it as safe as possible. And I have a lot of trust and faith in the work that those people do. And they haven't let us down.
Ross and Newman, assisted by pilot Rick Sturcombe, wrapped up the workday by staging the tools they will use on the third and final spacewalk of this mission, scheduled to get underway Saturday afternoon to complete the first stage of assembly of the International Space Station.
United States astronauts, meanwhile, are preparing to do some final repairs on the outside of the International Space Station. They're due to perform a spacewalk Saturday before releasing the station into orbit later this weekend. CNN's Tony Clark reports on how the historic project is playing with the US public.
The idea of a space station has captured the public's imagination at least as far back as 1870 with the Atlantic Monthly tale, The Brick Moon. A century later, science fiction became science reality as the American Skylab and the Soviets' Mir and Soyuz stations were put in orbit. With the space race reignited, in 1984, President Reagan proposed building a permanently manned space station, Freedom, by 1992 at a cost of $8 billion. Since then, there have been at least 7 major redesigns. Objectives have been pared down, while the cost estimate has ballooned to nearly $100 billion over the 10-year life of the station. Congressional opponents tried to kill the space station 19 times, once coming within 1 vote. Critics claim the benefits of a space station do not justify the cost.
I think that there's benefits in keeping children healthy, in educating them, in helping people to maintain the quality of life, and that's where we ought to be spending our money.
I think it's a great idea for the future. I just think we need to get other things done that are more important right now.
Copy, 30 minutes, FTD and step 1.
NASA counters that the space station will offer benefits that can't even be imagined today. And that's how many of the people we talked with feel.
Right now it sounds like a lot, but later on it'll pay off.
And I just think it's a great idea to explore space and come to a greater understanding of our universe.
While public interest in the space station appears high now, the real task for NASA will be to keep that interest and support over the next 5 years and 43 more space trips until the space station is completed. Tony Clark, CNN, Johnson Space Center.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog. You're crying all the time.
On Saturday, the Ground Control Center played a popular Elvis Presley song to awaken the astronauts aboard the shuttle. The spacewalking astronauts are expected to perform a number of tasks, including attaching a sack of tools to the space station for use on later assembly flights. The 6.5-hour walk is scheduled to conclude with a photo survey of the 7-story, 35-ton space station. While the space station assembly is real-life drama, the idea of going into space made its debut as fantasy. CNN's Garrett Gutley takes us on a space trip alternating fiction with reality.
The wonder of science fiction, a space station docking in 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Houston Endeavour, we have capture of Zarya.
The reality of docking on the current NASA mission to build an international space station. How well do fiction and reality meet in space? Look at the vision of artist Chesley Bonestell in 1952, long before the first man went into space. There is the shuttle with wings. There are the astronauts on their spacewalks and an orbiting space station. Vincent DeFate is a leading illustrator of space and understands the purpose of science fiction in words and images.
Most importantly, whether they were accurate or not, and many of them proved not to be accurate, most importantly, they created a credible vision for a time when people needed some means to accept ideas about the future and the possibilities of space development.
Space is fascinating. It is also infinite, which can make it difficult for mere mortals to grasp. Not only those of us who are occasionally interested in space exploration, but also those who devote their lives to it. They too need inspiration, the jolt of a new idea. Jules Verne provided the first jolt back in 1865, describing a rocket fired from a cannon that goes to the moon. The pioneers of rockets, including Robert Goddard, read Verne and H.G. Wells and others, as they developed rockets that would eventually take man to the moon. More than a decade before the launch of the first satellite, science fiction writer Arthur Clarke predicted how a few communication satellites could link the entire planet. John Mankins works at NASA imagining new programs and concepts. His plan for a magnetic levitation launch system, he says, is remarkably similar to one that appeared in the science fiction movie When Worlds Collide.
A lot of what we do in developing advanced concepts, ideas about what the future of the space program might be 10, 20, 30 years from now, is influenced by the things that we read and the images that we see in science fiction, both in books and in movies.
And why not? Science, like fiction, begins with imagination. And in space, as in fiction, there are no limits to where imagination can take you. Garrick Utley, CNN, New York.
Reaching for the sky. We'll take a look at the European Space Programme and we'll talk to a scientist and a future astronaut here at the European Space Centre. Hello and welcome to Inside Europe. This week we're at the European Space Centre at Noordwijk in the Netherlands. The centre, with its major test launch facilities and impressive areas of space research programmes, is the nerve centre of the European Space Agency. The agency was set up in 1975 to promote cooperation between European states in space research and technology. In the next half hour, we'll be looking at how European countries have been pulling together, not just in the area of space, but also research and technology in general. For our cover story, Inside Europe's Richard Goslin takes a look at the European Space Agency's latest and biggest ever venture.
It's now over 2 years since the darkest of days for the European Space Agency. 10 years' work and over $7 billion went up in smoke in French Guyana as the Ariane 5 rocket exploded less than 40 seconds after blastoff.
Tous les paramètres propulsifs sont normaux et la trajectoire est normale.
The disaster forced the agency, known as ESA, to rethink both its strategy and its budget. But 2.5 years later, there are reasons to be cheerful again. First, a public relations triumph for Spanish astronaut Pedro Duque, who flew the ESA flag on the recent Shuttle mission with John Glenn. And last month, the agency's involvement in the International Space Station finally saw some real progress, with the first components blast-off from Kazakhstan. The launch of the Zarya module ushered in a new era of international space cooperation. Europe has joined forces with Russia, the United States, Canada, Brazil and Japan to get the station into orbit, at a conservative estimate of some $30 billion. Observers say the project is an example of different European nations working together with a common goal.
Cooperation has been very useful, and it's a model of European cooperation, but with some of the problems of European cooperation.
Those problems include agreeing on the participation and financial contributions of the 14 nations which make up ESA. France, Germany and Italy lead the way, putting up almost 90% of Europe's $3.7 billion contribution. But as with the question of European monetary union, Britain has decided to stay on the sidelines, for now.
The key point for the UK is that it decided some 10 years ago that it wanted to concentrate what limited funding it had into other areas, and in particular into Earth observation. And it's also very keen to put money into near-market activities, And obviously there is some debate as to whether the International Space Station does actually give a return of investment.
Last week's launch of the shuttle Endeavour was just the second of an estimated 45 missions to construct the space station. That's prompted some experts to label the project as a bottomless pit for funds. But it's something ESA didn't get into lightly, and given its track record, it should be well represented when the project is finally completed.
One merit of the Space Agency, of the European Space Agency, has been that they have never abandoned the project once they have committed to it. And I think that is an example to NASA, which is all too keen occasionally to drop a project if something goes wrong financially.
And as for the International Space Station, it's so far, so good.
Houston Endeavour, we have capture of Zarya.
Richard Gosselin, CNN London, for Inside Europe.
Well, we're here today at the European Space Centre, and behind me you can see the prototypes of some of the Ariane rockets which have gone into space. I'm joined now by Jean-Pierre Le Breton, who is one of the science managers here. What kind of projects do you work on?
Well, I'm working on the Cassini-Huygens mission, which is on its way to Saturn at the moment. It's a joint project between NASA and the European Space Agency.
And why Saturn?
Well, Saturn is one of the major planets of the solar system, and exploring Saturn, and especially its moon Titan, which is the main target for the Huygens probe, has provided element of the mission, will tell us a lot more about the planets, of course, but also about the Earth. For example, Titan has an atmosphere which is in many ways very similar to that of the Earth. So by studying Titan, we learn more about the Earth, for example, about the greenhouse effect, how this effect will work on another planet, Titan, will teach us how to know it better on Earth.
And what about the nature of the cooperation between you and NASA? How does that work?
Well, I can only speak for the cooperation we have since 1984 on the Cassini-Huygens mission. It is excellent. We have a very good cooperation, which is really, one of the major reasons, I think, is the excellent cooperation between the scientists on both sides of the Atlantic, and this makes the mission very, very exciting.
And when you look into the future and for the remainder of your career, what do you see as the great challenges there that you'd like to deal with?
Oh, that's a very difficult question. We are, for example, at the moment studying a very ambitious mission like returning a sample from the surface of Venus, also returning a sample from the surface of Mercury. Those are very ambitious missions which I hope may be realized before the end of my career.
Jean-Pierre Le Breton, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
I'm joined now by trainee astronaut André Kuipers. André, tell me, first of all, how did you become a trainee astronaut?
Well, I wanted to become an astronaut always, and I already started working in this area. And I applied in 1990, and there was an advert in newspapers, and then the whole selection process started, a long process. And finally, only recently, on the 5th of October, I got selected.
And so it's all very new to you. So what have you been doing since then, and how long will your training go on?
I'm a medical doctor by profession, and I worked for the European Space Agency already now for 7 years, coordinating medical experiments in spaceflight, in Space Lab and previously in the Mir. And from now on I will start training as an astronaut. It will first be a basic training in Germany, then there will be a specialized training for the station in Houston, and after that I'm ready and I will be assigned to a mission, and then you start training on specific experiments.
Okay, so you've actually been in this module before, familiarizing yourself with all the equipment that you'll be using. What kind of research do you think you might be doing on the space station?
Well, there's different research, medical research, of course. We have material sciences. There's this big pieces of equipment here that can be exchanged with new missions. And we have also small pieces of equipment that will be brought up per experiment. This, for example, is equipment that is used by the astronauts to measure the oxygen in the blood. It's very simple, space qualified, and they use this together with breathing experiments or with exercise experiments to measure the oxygen content
and compare it with Earth.
Compare it with Earth, yeah.
And just an example of how everything needs to be tied down in space. We have here a toolbox, but not an ordinary toolbox. It seems here that everything has to be strapped down.
Yeah, that's one of the big problems of microgravity. It's a nice advantage for science because you can do good research, but the problem is that everything floats away. So everything has to be fixed. Here is two different systems to show how we can fix, for example, tools.
When you look back on why you think you became a trainee astronaut, what do you think singled you out from everybody else?
Well, it's hard to say what reasons are chosen to select somebody, and you don't know what is behind it. And of course, the factor that I already work in spaceflight and that I'm a medical doctor is probably also a reason, because they want people from all kind of disciplines. So there's military test pilots, physicists, engineers, and also medical doctors.
Well, congratulations and very best of luck to you.
Thanks.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog, crying all the time.
But first, on Saturday, Mission Control woke Shuttle Endeavour astronauts up with the strains of You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog by singer Elvis Presley. Then the crew began preparations for the 6.5-hour spacewalk. The astronauts are expected to attach a sack of tools to the International Space Station for use on later assembly flights. The walk is scheduled to conclude with a photo survey of the 7-story, 35-ton space station. CNN's Miles O'Brien joining us now with more from the Johnson Space Center in Texas. Hi, Miles.
Hello, Marina. Spacewalkers Jerry Ross and Jim Newman have just begun their third and final spacewalk for this, the first assembly mission for the International Space Station. They have been outside the orbiter Endeavour for about 40 minutes right now, and they will be doing several items on their chore list which will help future spacewalkers as they build this International Space Station over the next 5 years. They will install a bag of tools on the outside of the U.S. portion of the station. They will disconnect some cables. They'll install a handrail. They'll conduct a comprehensive photo survey for the engineers so they know exactly what things look like up there. And they'll test a portable jetpack, which future spacewalkers will use in case their tether system should fail them. In addition, they will poke at a stuck antenna on the Russian Zarya module to try and deploy an antenna, docking module antenna. It's a technique which worked on an identical antenna during their last spacewalk. Now, during that first spacewalk, Jerry Ross broke the U.S. record for cumulative time as a spacewalker. The previous record was 29 hours and 41 minutes. Now, while he had never lost a tool or a part before, 3 pieces got away with him during those 2 spacewalks. Last night, I spoke to the crew of Endeavour, and I asked Ross what happened.
I don't have the slightest idea what happened, Miles. I did 4 previous spacewalks, never lost an item. I try to train very hard to do the proper tether protocols to make sure that nothing comes loose in the water tank at home. I thought I'd done all the proper things here, and I have absolutely no explanations for why things came loose.
I suppose if the most veteran of U.S. spacewalkers has a problem, that doesn't bode too well for the future. I guess this is something that future missions will be looking very closely at as this construction continues in space.
Well, I think both Jim and I have learned from my experiences on this flight. We have been putting multiple tethers onto most of the objects now just to make sure that one can't come inadvertently loose somehow and release the hardware.
Fortunately, nothing which floated away was critical. One was a piece which was supposed to be removed and returned to Earth. The other 2 pieces were not considered critical pieces. They will be brought up and installed on future missions. Just a few moments ago, I heard Jerry Ross talking to Jim Newman, and he asked him to double-check to make sure that a tether was attached to a piece which they're installing onto Zarya a little bit later. So they're being doubly cautious up there in space. Miles O'Brien, CNN, reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, Houston. Marina?
Miles, I understand the astronauts will be returning on Tuesday, but more than 160 hours of spacewalk time will be taking place in the next 5 years to build this International Space Station. What kind of things will the station be able to do?
No, just to clarify one point, it's not 160 hours, it's 160 spacewalks. Each of those spacewalks is about 6.5 hours, and each of those spacewalks involves 2 individuals. So it comes out to about 1,700 hours of spacewalk time. clearly an unprecedented amount of spacewalk time. Nothing like this has ever been attempted. NASA has been watching this very closely because they need to train so many crews, and it is a safety issue. Anytime you step outside of the confines of a spacecraft, it is a dangerous proposition. So they've been watching it, but nevertheless, there's a trade-off between making things robotic and heavy and making them relatively simple and requiring some sort of extravehicular activity, as NASA calls it, or a spacewalk.
CNN's Miles O'Brien, thank you so very much for clarifying that.
As astronauts continue their work on the International Space Station, we'll get a live report. At this hour, Endeavour astronauts are hard at work building the International Space Station, and they're making it look easy. CNN's Miles O'Brien joins us now for a live update from Mission Control. Hi, Miles.
Denise, it may look easy, but of course it isn't. Astronauts Jerry Ross and Jim Newman are about 250 miles above the surface of the Earth, traveling at about 17,000 miles an hour in tandem with the Space Shuttle Endeavour, which is attached to that embryonic International Space Station. Looking at some live pictures right now, you're looking at Jerry Ross. He is affixed to the end of the shuttle's robotic arm, sort of a glorified cherry picker. In his hand, you'll see what appears to be a 10-foot pole. It's essentially a boat hook. And if you look toward the center upper part of your screen, this is the focus of his attention. It's an antenna on the Russian-built Zarya module, which is essentially a power plant. It's an antenna which did not deploy as it was supposed to when the Zarya was launched a couple of weeks ago. What he's going to try to do is essentially just jiggle that antenna and let it deploy, much like a party favor at a birthday party. It just uncurls. Right now they're trying to discuss which way to jiggle it. When you're in space, every move is carefully choreographed. It's important that that antenna, when it deploys, doesn't hit Jerry Ross, because certainly if a suit were to tear, that would be very big trouble for an astronaut. So right now, that's what they're considering. They're having some difficulty getting that antenna to deploy. During their second spacewalk, his partner, Jim Newman, used the same boat hook to deploy an antenna on the opposite side of the Zarya module. That worked out successfully. The folks at NASA and the folks at Mission Control outside of Moscow are evaluating this situation as we speak. They are about midway through this spacewalk, still have some time to check this situation out before they move on to other matters. Earlier in the spacewalk, they were looking ahead toward future missions, attaching a tool bag to the side of that embryonic International Space Station, taking some cables off that are no longer needed, stowing them away, checking the tension on certain cables. So far, everything operating according to the timeline, and we will continue to be watching it as we look for this antenna to deploy. Some spectacular images as the two spacewalkers continued their job. They've been very careful to make sure all of the tools and all of the items that they're going to be installing onto the Zarya and the Unity are carefully tethered. Over the first two spacewalks, three items got away from them. And this is kind of an unusual thing for spacewalkers to lose things. It's very important that they keep track of their tools and all other items. It can be a hazard in low Earth orbit, not to mention the fact that if they're critical parts, they need to be attached to the International Space Station. Once again, that spacewalk about midway through. So far, things are going according to the timeline. It's the last and third spacewalk of this, the first assembly mission for the International Space Station. Denise?
Miles, you said this is the third spacewalk of this mission. Of course, this is really just the tip of the iceberg. There are more than 100 spacewalks to go, right?
Actually, 159 to go after this one at least. An awful lot of spacewalk time. NASA has been very concerned about spending too much on these spacewalks because it takes an awful lot of time to train for them, and plus they are relatively dangerous anytime an astronaut steps outside the relatively safe confines of an orbiter. Nevertheless, that's the design that they've come up with, and NASA here at the Johnson Space Center says it is very confident that they can accomplish what amounts to a Herculean task in space.
And of course, these astronauts will be ready to come back on Tuesday. Now, the next step isn't until the spring, is that right?
That's right. What we're waiting for now is for the Russians to finish a critical module, the service module, which is a piece that the Russians will build. It will be a key portion of the early part of the International Space Station. It will provide command and control for the space station. Once that is ready to go, it will be launched, and shortly thereafter, the first expedition crew, the first full-time residents of the space station will be on board. NASA right now projecting that to occur in January of 2000.
All right, Miles O'Brien with the latest on the Endeavour astronauts as they take their walk in space, repairing everything they need to. Thank you. And they are attaching a tool bag to the International Space Station for use in the station's continuing assembly. The spacewalk was scheduled to last for about 6.5 hours. The shuttle Endeavour is to undock from the station Sunday and return to Earth Tuesday. The next stage of construction is scheduled for May, when another assembly crew is to arrive. Construction is expected to take 5 years.
Flight Day 10 began on board the Space Shuttle Endeavour Saturday morning, and all 6 crew members had a part to play in the third and final spacewalk of the mission, designed to prepare the exterior of the International Space Station for future assembly flights. Saturday afternoon, with Commander Bob Cabana at the controls, the astronauts powered up the shuttle's robot arm to play its part in the day's activities. As was true on each of the previous spacewalks on this flight, mission specialist Jerry Ross opened the hatch on Endeavour's airlock to start the excursion about a half an hour ahead of schedule, and immediately went to work setting out tools and tethers he and mission specialist Jim Newman would need for their work around the modules of the new space station. First up, with Ross in the foot restraint at the end of the robot arm, the astronauts installed a large bag of tools on the exterior of the Unity module, tools that will now be available for use by other spacewalking construction workers during future station assembly jobs. After that, the astronauts moved to the outside of pressurized mating adapter number 2 to remove a set of cables. Those cables operated the docking mechanism in the other PMA, the one now attached to the Zarya control module. The cables were removed since those 2 parts of the station will never be undocked from one another. Then Ross and Newman moved to the exterior of Zarya, to the area of an undeployed antenna for the control module's backup docking system. Carrying a 10-foot pole with a grappling hook on one end, Ross was positioned to try to deploy that antenna, just as Newman had done with a similar antenna during the second spacewalk of the mission. Pilot Rick Sturko, coordinating the spacewalk from onboard Endeavour, told Ross to proceed.
Okay, go ahead and give it a try, Jerry.
Okay, here we go. Moving.
Okay. IMAX rolling.
What's up?
Okay.
It's just like Jim's.
Ross continued his attempts to prod the antenna into springing to its full length for several minutes before Cabana started to move him to another location.
Here it goes. It goes really slow. It's well over the tail.
Oh, that's great news.
Well over the tail. There it goes. You can see it in the sun. You blinked, didn't you, Jerry? I saw it go. Pretty good.
Good job, Jerry.
All right.
After stowing the boat hook on the Russian-built module, Ross and Newman moved to the aft end of Zarya, where they installed a handrail to help future spacewalkers move about in the area, and then inspected the docking port where the service module is to link up to the station next year to ensure that it was free of debris. While inspecting that area, the astronauts found an experiment tray cover unexpectedly open. Mission managers in Houston conferred for several minutes with their counterparts in the Zarya Control Center outside Moscow about whether to close the cover or leave it alone before spacecraft communicator Chris Hadfield relayed the decision.
We would like you to open it. We want you to fix it in the open position. And if for some reason the mechanism won't let you do that, then we'd like you to leave it as is. And of course, when you're done, get some photographs in its final config.
Ross and Newman secured the experiment tray cover, then made their way down the almost 80-foot length of the station to pick up their next tasks. A detailed photo survey of the condition of Zarya and Unity, images which will be employed during the training of upcoming space shuttle crews, and the configuration of tools that were left on the exterior of the station. After that, a tethered flight test of the SAFER, or Simplified Aid for EVA Rescue, the jet backpack worn by spacewalkers that's designed to allow him or her to fly back to the station should they ever become untethered. All their tasks complete, Ross and Newman re-entered the airlock to conclude a 6-hour and 59-minute-long spacewalk. Their 3 excursions, totaling 21 hours and 22 minutes, represent just the first steps in the hundreds of hours of spacewalks that will be needed to complete assembly of the station. On board Endeavour, the astronauts finished their workday by setting up cameras and other tools which will be used Sunday afternoon when the shuttle crew is to undock from the International Space Station and start the final leg of their 12-day mission.
Space station builders Jerry Ross and Jim Newman were looking ahead and laying some high above the groundwork for future orbiting hard hats. They spent most of their third stint in space doing prep work at the world's most remote construction site.
I'm hungry. What's in the refrigerator? Nothing edible.
First off, in the 6.5-hour spacewalk, placing a tool bag on the outside of the U.S. connecting piece, Unity.
We will not sit for standby. Let me get a real good grip on it.
They also spent some time pulling cables, clearing away those used solely for getting the 2 pieces of the space station coupled together, and checking the tension on those that will remain. And they perched on top of Zarya to place handrails there to help future space workers.
I don't think it's going to go anywhere because we've already got them tied down pretty tight on those things. We can't afford it, though. I know.
In a reprise of their second spacewalk, Ross used a 10-foot boat hook to pry loose a stuck docking antenna on Zarya. An identical antenna was dislodged the last time they were out.
You want a couple more taps on this side first?
Sure, that'd be fine.
Really slow.
It was a picture-perfect spacewalk with a picture-taking conclusion. The pair carefully photographed the exterior of the space station to help engineers make plans and solve future problems.
This is weird. You don't do this every day, unfortunately.
Clearly savoring the moment, Jerry Ross took in the view and offered some thanks to his daughter for making him some glove liners.
I gotta tell my daughter these gloves are really great.
Before they returned to the relatively safe confines of Endeavour, Ross and Newman tested a small emergency jetpack which station builders will be carrying in case they break free of their tethers. That's an important issue for spacewalkers in the station era. Should an astronaut free fall away from a shuttle, the orbiter is nimble enough to maneuver in for a speedy rescue. A million-pound space station won't have that capability. Miles O'Brien, CNN at the Johnson Space Center, Houston.
Wildfires around the world made big news this year, from Mexico to Africa to Indonesia. Now new images from NASA's TOM satellite are helping scientists track how smog generated by those fires has moved around the Earth. Researchers want to know more about smog and other pollutants from wildfires because they create poor air quality around the world and possibly contribute to global warming. The increased number of wildfires over the past year has been blamed on El Nino-related drought. New data from NASA's polar spacecraft is helping scientists better understand what happens when a solar storm hits Earth. It all starts when a cloud of charged particles called a coronal mass ejection erupts off the sun and washes out across the solar system. The storm of particles from the sun slams into Earth and compresses the planet's magnetic field. That, in turn, squeezes a stream of oxygen and other gases out into space from the northern and southern polar regions. Scientists have known for a while that gases occasionally leak out into space from the polar areas, but this is the first confirmation that solar storms are the cause. U.S. law enforcement officials in Miami have announced an unusual seizure. They thought they'd seen it all, but they say in all their years of confiscating drugs, weapons, and other contraband, they had never come across a moon rock until now. Mark Potter has the story.
It may be hard to believe that this tiny rock, weighing barely more than a gram, was offered to undercover agents for $5 million. But at a news conference, officials from Customs, the Postal Service, and NASA said that was the asking price for this nearly 4 billion-year-old piece of the lunar surface. Agents say the rock was confiscated near Miami from a man who kept it in a safety deposit box in this bank. He said he bought it from an official in Honduras.
He's identified only by saying a former Honduran military officer, retired military officer.
Indeed, in 1973, the rock was given to the Honduran government by President Richard Nixon. Astronauts aboard Apollo 17 collected the rock on the last mission to the moon. It was part of a larger rock that was broken apart and shared with a number of countries.
We hope that this will be a symbol of what our feelings are, what the feelings of the Apollo program are, and a symbol of mankind that we can live in peace and harmony in the future.
Customs agents seized the rock because it wasn't declared when brought into the country, and say they will return it to Honduras. The investigation began with agents placing a newspaper ad asking to buy moon rocks. They actually were trying to catch scam artists selling fake ones. The last thing they ever expected to get was a real moon rock. Mark Potter, CNN, Miami.
Die internationale Raumstation soll in 2 Stunden vom US-Shuttle Endeavour getrennt werden. 2 Astronauten haben bei ihrem Außeneinsatz das Manöver vorbereitet. Sie überprüften die wichtigsten Kabelverbindungen an der Außenhaut der Raumstation. Am Dienstag tritt die Endeavour ihren Heimflug an. Die Raumstation ISS soll im Mai weiter ausgebaut werden.
Einmal mussten 2 der Crewmitglieder raus aus der Fähre, um Reparaturen an den ersten beiden Einheiten durchzuführen. Denn heute Nacht soll die Raumstation vom Space Shuttle abgekoppelt werden und dann alleine im All schweben. Thorsten Berger mit Einzelheiten.
Beim Ausstieg durch die enge Ladeluke hat es Jerry Ross mit seinem sperrigen Raumanzug noch ein bisschen schwer. Doch keine 5 Minuten später schwebt er mit seinem Kollegen James Newman im Weltall, 450 Kilometer über der Erde und nur mit einem Kabel am Shuttle gesichert. Newman hat sich auf dem Roboterarm der Endeavour eingeklinkt. Ohne diese Sicherung würden die beiden in wenigen Sekunden rettungslos vom Shuttle abtreiben. Zum Abschluss der Mission müssen die beiden Astronauten noch wichtige Feinarbeiten erledigen. Ross entfernt per Hand überschüssige Kabelverbindungen. Newman fotografiert ihn dabei. Danach steigen die beiden an der 7-stöckigen Konstruktion entlang und kontrollieren die Außenhaut. Ross klettert noch einmal zum russischen Saja-Modul empor, um eine klemmende Antenne zu reparieren. Mit seinen dicken Handschuhen ruckelt er so lange daran herum, bis sie schließlich funktioniert. Als die beiden Astronauten zu ihrer letzten Aufgabe kommen, überfliegt die Endeavour gerade die Nachtseite der Erde. Am US-Modell Unity befestigen sie einen Werkzeugkoffer für die kommenden Missionen an der Raumstation. Erst in 5 Monaten werden wieder Menschen zur Baustelle im All fliegen. Noch heute Abend wird sich die Endeavour von den Modulen trennen und am Dienstag zur Erde zurückkehren. Bis die Station im Jahr 2004 ihren Betrieb aufnehmen kann, werden noch mehr als 100 solcher Einsätze nötig sein.
Die Astronauten der Raumfähre Endeavour haben ihre Arbeiten an der ISS-Station beendet. 400 Kilometer über der Erde bereiteten sie die Ankunft des nächsten Bautrupps im Mai vor. Die Endeavour soll am Dienstag nach Florida zurückkehren. Zuvor setzt sie noch einen Satelliten aus.
Die bisher aus 2 Bauabschnitten bestehende Station ISS soll sich am Abend von der Raumfähre lösen und ihren ersten selbstständigen Flug um die Erde beginnen. Die Weltraummechaniker Ross und Newman hatten bei ihrem 3. Montageeinsatz im All unter anderem Werkzeuge für künftige Arbeiten befestigt. In den nächsten 5 Jahren sollen noch rund 100 weitere Bauteile an die Station angebaut werden. Die Endeavour soll übermorgen wieder auf der Erde landen.
Sollte ein Arbeiter einmal versehentlich von der Station wegdriften, kann er sich mit dem Jetpack zur Baustelle zurückbewegen. Beim Test wurde allerdings vorsichtshalber eine Sicherheitsleine verwendet. Bislang besteht ISS nur aus dem russischen Modul Zarya und dem amerikanischen Bauteil Unity. Ungefähr 100 weitere Bauteile sollen in den kommenden 5 Jahren noch hinzugefügt werden. Erst dann ist die 60 Milliarden Mark teure Station komplett.
Astronauts aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour are scheduled to undock from the International Space Station very shortly as they prepare for their trip home. The crew is due to return to Florida's Kennedy Space Center late Tuesday or early Wednesday.
Die internationale Raumstation ISS. Sie fliegt jetzt frei im All. Am Abend koppelte die US-Raumfähre Endeavour ab. Während ihrer Mission hatten die Astronauten ein russisches und ein amerikanisches Modul miteinander verbunden. Sie bilden den Grundstein für die Station im All.
Zum Abschied spielte die Kontrollstation sentimentale Schlager ins All. Auf Wiedersehen, Liebling, es ist Zeit zu gehen. Rührende Grüße aus Houston zur Vorbereitung auf den Rückflug. Gestern hatten sie noch einen harten Arbeitstag. Jerry Ross und James Newman mussten außerhalb der Raumstation Kabel verlegen und prüfen. Außerdem testeten sie ein Rettungssystem, mit dem abdriftende Astronauten zur Station zurückkehren können. Sie installierten einen Werkzeugkasten, den nachfolgende Crews für weitere Montage brauchen, und sie reparierten eine klemmende Antenne am russischen Modul Zarya. Für die beiden Amerikaner war es der dritte Außeneinsatz dieser Reise, ferngesteuert mit einem Roboterarm aus dem Inneren der Fähre Endeavour. Insgesamt haben sie 21 Stunden und 22 Minuten außerhalb des Shuttles gearbeitet. Ein anstrengendes, doch spannendes und schließlich erfolgreiches Unternehmen. Vor knapp 2 Stunden hat Endeavour sich von der Raumstation abgekoppelt und die Rückreise begonnen. Am Dienstag landet die Crew in Florida nach einer historischen Mission.
Shuttle Endeavour has undocked from the International Space Station. Endeavour pilot Rick Sturckow pulled the shuttle away from the 77-foot, 70,000-pound space station. Astronauts have spent the past few days connecting the first 2 components of that station. 43 more missions and 159 more spacewalks will be required to get all that work finished. Station. They have parted ways. Their separation this afternoon ends a week-long docking. During that time, Endeavour astronauts ventured outside the shuttle 3 times to work on the space station. Endeavour is scheduled to return to Earth Tuesday evening. That's shortly before 11 Eastern Time. CNN plans live coverage of the shuttle landing.
Die nationale Raumstation fliegt jetzt selbstständig um die Erde. Die US-Raumfähre Endeavour koppelte am Abend von ihr ab. Anschließend umkreiste die Endeavour noch einmal die beiden Module. Am Morgen hatten 2 Astronauten noch einmal 7 Stunden dort gearbeitet und die Station für weitere Arbeiten vorbereitet. Sie brachten an der Außenseite Geländer an und überprüften noch einmal alle Kabel. Die Endeavour soll morgen auf die Erde zurückkehren.
Die Raumfähre Endeavour hat von der internationalen Raumstation ISS abgekoppelt und befindet sich wieder auf dem Heimweg. Die Astronauten hatten in den vergangenen Tagen die beiden ersten Module Zarya und Unity zusammengesetzt. Vorerst wird die neue Raumstation aber ohne Besatzung die Erde umkreisen. Erst im Mai sind weitere Arbeiten geplant.
Sunday morning's wake-up call to astronaut Bob Cabana and his crewmates on board the Space Shuttle Endeavour was the first such call ever sent from the new International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston. And spacecraft communicator Mike Fink's message was that the crew's work with the new station was about to come to an end.
Endeavour, good morning from the station team here in Houston, Moscow, and all over the world.
Good morning, Beamer. Well, I'm afraid it is time to go.
On board Endeavour, Cabana powered up the shuttle's backup systems as pilot Rick Sturckow took his place at the shuttle's controls on the aft flight deck. The other astronauts were also in position when spacecraft communicator Chris Hadfield gave them the go to proceed.
Endeavour Houston, we have confirmed with the International Space Station folks and the Space Shuttle folks, you have a go for undocking.
Roger, go for undocking from the International Space Station.
With all ready to go, Sturckow released the orbiter docking system's hold on pressurized mating adapter number 1, undocking Endeavour from the new space station. The 2 spacecraft slowly separated from one another a short distance before Sturckow took control, carefully flying Endeavour to a distance of 450 feet above the International Space Station. From there, he started to slowly fly the shuttle around the station so his crewmates could conduct a detailed photographic survey. For a little more than an hour, Endeavour soared around the space station to gather the first ever images of the International Space Station in free flight. First against the backdrop of the Earth, looking up at the aft end of Zarya to the port where the service module is to dock next year. Back down again on the Zarya and Unity modules. After completing 1.5 revolutions of the station, Sturckow fired Endeavour's jets in a final separation maneuver, leaving the International Space Station on its own. Monitored by flight controllers on 2 continents, the vehicle will fly solo until the next shuttle assembly and supply mission, scheduled for this coming May. With the primary tasks of the mission completed, Endeavour's astronauts were given a few hours off-duty time Sunday evening before gathering on the middeck to discuss the progress of their flight in a series of interviews. Cabana said all of the astronauts were impressed by the sight of the new space station flying on its own.
I think the thing that overwhelmed all of us, or maybe not overwhelmed us, but really impressed us, was when we undocked today and we looked back on what we'd accomplished in the last 10 days, and it was amazing. I mean, here we are, we got airborne, we had Unity in the bay, and when we left a functioning space station ready for the next module to come up. And it was just hard to believe that we accomplished all that in the time allowed.
Mission specialist Jerry Ross, whose 3 spacewalks on this mission give him more spacewalking time than any other American, agreed with his crewmates that most of the thanks for the success of this mission is owed to people on the ground.
I think we have developed a very strong team of people back in Houston, and there certainly is a strong team in Russia as well that understand the systems, that develop the systems, and that get us trained and get ready to go. And we learned some things on this flight that we'll take back to pass on to the future crews, but I think we're in good shape for what we have to tackle.
And cosmonaut Sergei Krikalev, a veteran of more than a year in space during 2 missions to Russia's Mir space station, was asked if he had any suggestions for keeping the new space station from becoming as cluttered as the Mir has over its almost 13 years on orbit.
This is one of the comments which I'm going to make on debrief, because Mir station also was on first couple missions also clean and empty. But when you return back from Mir station and go into simulator, you're amazed how empty it is. We have to keep order on this station from very beginning. We have to put additional effort probably, especially with all these new upcoming missions, to be sure that everything on station will be in proper order.
Late Sunday, Endeavour's crew accomplished another mission objective, deploying a small, non-recoverable technology demonstration satellite for the country of Argentina out of a canister in the shuttle's payload bay. A similar deployment of a U.S. Air Force satellite is scheduled for Monday night, just before Endeavour's astronauts begin packing up the orbiter for Tuesday night's planned landing at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. As Flight Day 12 began on the final Space Shuttle mission of 1998, mission specialist Nancy Curry and spacecraft communicator Robert Turbine were in tune with the Monday morning wake-up theme.
Wow, I feel good. I knew that I wouldn't.
Good morning, dog crew. How you feeling this morning?
We are feeling terrific. We are ready to start packing and coming home to see our families just in time for Christmas. And can't be more pleased with the way the mission's gone, and we're looking forward to seeing a wonderful landing from Bob.
In preparation for that scheduled Tuesday night landing at the Kennedy Space Center, wrapping up the first International Space Station Assembly mission, Curry joined Commander Bob Cabana and pilot Rick Sturko on the flight deck for routine pre-landing systems checks. One of the orbiter's auxiliary power units was started to provide hydraulic power so the astronauts could manipulate the shuttle's flight control surfaces. And then the crew test-fired each of the shuttle's reaction control system jets. All systems checked out in good shape for landing. Afterward, the entire crew got together to finish planning the job of packing up Endeavour's crew cabin before taking time to discuss the highlights of the mission with reporters in the United States and Canada. Cabana said his crew appreciates the part they've played in an historic event.
I think that we've all come to realize that we've laid the cornerstone for a permanent international outpost in space, that space exploration is our destiny, that we're going to go beyond the confines of low Earth orbit, and that when we do it, we're going to do it amongst ourselves united, with everybody working together for the benefit of all. So I think we're extremely proud to be a part of that effort. It's been a unique opportunity, and there but for the grace of God go anybody else in our office. We have an extremely talented astronaut corps in Houston and in Russia, and any one of us could have been here doing this. So we're going to continue to prepare and be prepared to explore more in the future and add to space station.
Mission specialist Jerry Ross, now with more experience walking in space than any other American, was asked to compare his 3 spacewalks on this mission with ones he made in 1985 to develop space station assembly techniques.
The experiments we did on the ease-access experiments on the STS-88 back in 1985 were a very early attempt to try to understand what different types of techniques might be usable for assembling hardware in space. The first EVA in particular was a very, very hand-intensive spacewalk. I was very fatigued at the end of that one. The second one was somewhat less energetic, but still also I came in very tired after that one. These EVAs that Jim and I conducted were longer than either of those, but they were at a more moderate pace. Also, I had better gloves this time, which meant that they didn't get as tired as easily. So I came in feeling fine physically, no problems at all from any one of the 3 EVAs, and was ready to go out the next time.
Curry praised the maneuverability of the shuttle's Canadian-built robotic arm, which she used in conjunction with the Canadian Space Vision System to mate the Zarya control module to the Unity connecting node. Newman was asked how he thinks the Space Vision System will contribute to future assembly missions.
STS, I think, performed well for a system that's still in development under difficult conditions. The full debrief is going to have to wait, I think, until I have a chance to talk to the team and see their analysis of the data. But I think it does have some challenges ahead, but it also has some capabilities. The challenges are using the orbiter cameras. We've constrained them to use the orbiter cameras, and those are difficult to focus and zoom precisely. The other challenges are the lighting. The lighting conditions on the space station, assembly tasks and on the space station are also going to be challenges. So I think that the technology is there and the capability is there, but I'd have to say that it's not really fully operational yet. It's a system in development, and we're looking for good things in the future, but it will need some work.
Monday evening, the astronauts successfully deployed the second non-recoverable satellite of the mission, a U.S. Air Force technology demonstration platform called MightySat. And then all 6 went to work stowing items throughout the crew cabin. Endeavour's astronauts are scheduled to be awakened late Tuesday morning to begin final preparations for a scheduled Tuesday night landing in Florida to conclude the first assembly mission to the International Space Station.
After a week of intense construction work, the crew is preparing to return home to Earth on Tuesday. Another shuttle will return in May to deliver cranes and tools for construction work on future missions. The third piece of the station, the Russian-built living module, will arrive late next summer.
Endeavour kehrt zur Erde zurück. Vergangene Nacht koppelten die 6 Astronauten an Bord die Fähre von der künftigen Weltraumstation ISS ab. Auf dem Heimflug setzten sie einen Forschungssatelliten aus. In den vergangenen Tagen hatte die Besatzung die ersten beiden Module der ISS zusammengesetzt. Bis 2004 sollen noch mehr als 100 Teile für die Station ins All gebracht werden. 16 Staaten sind am Bau der ISS beteiligt, darunter auch Deutschland.
Die US-Raumfähre hat die internationale Raumstation ISS verlassen. Frühestens im Mai nächsten Jahres wird der künftige Stützpunkt im All weiter ausgebaut. Auf ihrem Rückflug setzten die Astronauten einen argentinischen Forschungssatelliten aus. Sie werden am Dienstagabend auf der Erde zurückerwartet.
But forecasters say cloudy weather could postpone their scheduled landing, now less than 5 hours away. CNN's Miles O'Brien joins us now with details. Miles.
Actually, Judy, the weather picture at the Kennedy Space Center is improving as we speak. Right now, NASA forecasters are predicting a 70% chance the clouds will clear for landing at 10:54 p.m. Eastern Time. Of course, the picture is always favorable in space, and on the 12th day of their historic mission, the 6-member crew of Endeavour kicked up their feet and took in the view before getting their spacecraft ready to become a glider. After all they have accomplished, beginning the assembly of the International Space Station, I don't suppose anyone would begrudge them their time, including their commander, Bob Cabana, who told me before the mission he encourages his crew to stop and smell the roses.
You can get up in space and it can be so busy that you can't appreciate where you are. And one of the things that I do is always tell first-time flyers, you have to take time to appreciate what a unique opportunity this is, how special it is. And you know how beautiful all the pictures are of space? They're better than that. And so I tell folks, don't take a picture. You gotta find a few free minutes and park yourself in front of a window and just look out and make a memory, because what you see and what you remember You're going to be disappointed when you see a picture of it. But if you keep it in your memory, it's there forever.
Of course, the shuttle can't wait forever for good weather. If the clouds don't clear, the crew will try a second try 90 minutes later, and then if that fails, they'll get another 24 hours to enjoy the view. Judy?
All right, Miles, I'm going to remember that. Roses in space. CNN plans live coverage of the Shuttle Endeavour landing, now set, as we said, for 10:56 p.m. Eastern. Worldview will continue in a moment.
The following is CNN's coverage of a live event.
Hello, I'm Colleen McEdwards at the CNN Center in Atlanta. We want to take you live now to the Kennedy Space Center in the U.S. state of Florida for the landing of the Space Shuttle Endeavour. After its mission to put together
for Endeavour. One flawless mission completed, and a new era in space exploration just begun. Nose gear touchdown.
Watching live pictures of the Space Shuttle Endeavour. It has just touched down at the Kennedy Space Center in the U.S. state of Florida on runway 15.
Endeavour, welcome home. Bob, that was a beautiful landing. And Bob, CJ, Jerry, Nancy, Jim, and Sergey, thanks a lot for an awesome job starting our space station adventure. We have no post-landing deltas.
Roger, no deltas. It's great to be home after such an exciting mission, Scott. And our congratulations to all the folks that worked so hard to make it happen. I'm so proud of everybody in this crew. Y'all done an outstanding job.
Referring to members of the crew and Commander Robert Cabana, who were ready to come home after an exhausting yet satisfying journey. That's how they described it. It spanned nearly 12 days in space, working on the new International Space Station. A little bit of information for you on what they did while they were in orbit. 5 Americans and 1 Russian joined the Russian-built Zarya control module and the American-made Unity connecting chamber. Those are both parts of the new International Space Station that is being constructed. The crew also spent a full day actually inside the station, hooking up some of the electronics that will be needed. This was a rare nighttime landing that you've just watched, the Space Shuttle Endeavour making a rare nighttime landing. Earlier in the day, thick clouds were threatening to keep the shuttle up perhaps an extra day, but by sunset, the sky had begun to clear and the landing got underway pretty much as scheduled. This was the first of some 36 space shuttle flights that NASA thinks will be needed over the next 5 years in order to build the new International Space Station. It won't be ready for human cargo until the year 2000. And it is set to be entirely complete by the year 2004. All of this is expected to cost at least $40 billion.
ET umbilical doors are coming open.
Endeavour Max is watching.
Two of the astronauts on board the shuttle, Jerry Ross and James Newman, actually made 3 spacewalks to wire Zarya, that's the Russian module, and Unity, the American-made portion, together and attached new antennas and some other equipment. There were a few problems.
Endeavour Houston for Bob on 5-8. They go for the ammonia activation Alpha Secon.
But they were able, apparently, to get done what they needed to get done during this mission.
Ammonia secondary on.
Once again, you are looking at live pictures now, just as the Space Shuttle Endeavour has made its landing at the Kennedy Space Center after 12 days in space working on the new International Space Station. And as you can see, everything went off apparently as scheduled and without any problems. The next construction mission scheduled is scheduled actually to happen in May, and there are 35 more space shuttle flights that NASA thinks will be needed in order to complete the new International Space Station by the year 2004. I'm Colleen McEdwards at CNN Center in Atlanta. Thanks for watching.
This has been a CNN Live event.
20:53 Uhr sicher auf dem Weltraumbahnhof Cape Canaveral. Meistens landen Raumfähren bei Tag. Nachtlandungen, die wesentlich schwieriger sind, hat es bisher kaum gegeben. Der nächste Flug zur neuen Raumstation ist für Mai 1999 geplant.
Endeavour ist am frühen Morgen sicher zur Erde zurückgekehrt. Sie landete wenige Minuten vor 5 Uhr mitteleuropäischer Zeit auf dem Weltraumbahnhof von Cape Canaveral in Florida, eine äußerst seltene Nachtlandung. Die Astronauten hatten bei ihrer Mission Zarya und Unity die ersten beiden Module der künftigen internationalen Raumstation ISS zusammengefügt. Sie soll in den kommenden 5 Jahren um weitere 100 Teile anwachsen.
Tagen sicher nach Cape Canaveral zurück. Es war eine der wenigen Nachtlandungen in der Raumfahrtgeschichte. Die 6-köpfige Besatzung hatte die 2 ersten Module der internationalen Raumstation ISS im All zusammengesetzt.
Die amerikanische Raumfähre Endeavour ist im Raumfahrtzentrum Cape Canaveral sicher gelandet. Die Astronauten hatten im All Module aus Russland und den USA zusammengefügt. Damit begann der Bau der ersten internationalen Raumstation ISS. In den kommenden 5 Jahren werden noch weitere 100 Teile in den Weltraum gebracht.
The Shuttle Endeavour is back on Earth after NASA's first flight to build the International Space Station. Crew members and NASA officials were jubilant over the accomplishments of the 12-day mission. As Miles O'Brien reports, the mission hit a few snags, but in most respects, it was smooth and successful.
Houston Endeavour, wheel stopped. Endeavour, welcome home. Bob, that was a beautiful landing.
With nearly 12 days and 5 million miles behind them, the crew of Endeavour hit the ground running, just as they did during their historic mission.
Range to Zarya now about.
Perhaps the hardest moments came early on when they rendezvoused with the first orbiting piece of the International Space Station, a Russian-built power plant called Zarya, or Sunrise. Lacking a direct line of sight, Commander Bob Cabana and robotic arm virtuoso Nancy Curry used TV cameras and other instruments to inch beside the 40,000-pound Zarya and then attach it to the first U.S. contribution to the space station, a connecting segment called Unity.
Houston Endeavour, we have capture of Zarya.
It actually seemed as hard as I thought it was going to be. We just took it nice and slow. Probably painfully slow if you ask Bob, but took it nice and slow, and all the training paid off. It was.
This expansion's okay, isn't it?
But building the skeleton of the embryonic station was not enough. Spacewalkers Jerry Ross and Jim Newman ventured into the void to stitch together the station's nervous system. In addition to joining power and data cables, they attached antennas, bolted on handholds, and left a tool bag for future crews. During the complicated walks, Ross mistakenly let 3 parts float away. They weren't critical, but it was an embarrassing episode for NASA's most experienced spacewalker.
It was very regrettable circumstances that I lost those pieces of hardware. I'm not sure how it happened.
Setting up air ducting.
The crew also spent 2 days inside the new station, activating and installing equipment, attaching ductwork, and enjoying the extra inner space.
We kept pinching ourselves and saying, it can't be real. It's going so well, and everything is so right, and it just looks so good.
The end of this mission is really a beginning for NASA. It will take at least 35 more shuttle missions to build the million-pound International Space Station. NASA is girding for the unprecedented challenge ahead.
Hello and welcome. I'm Ann Kellen. U.S. and British firepower pounded Iraq this week, a long-anticipated response to Saddam Hussein's alleged blocking of UN weapons inspectors. The attack relied heavily on cruise missiles, which also played an important role in the Persian Gulf War almost 8 years ago. As Steve Young reports, the missiles haven't changed all that much, but new technology has made launches easier and more accurate.
January 1991. Cruise missiles provide the main punch as the Allies fight Saddam Hussein. December 1998. Once again, the Raytheon Tomahawk cruise missile is the weapon of choice.
For the most part, the defense tools have stayed relatively the same. They've just got a little bit more accurate. Again, the weapons were very accurate previously, although there were what I would say were many miscalculations where many cruise missiles were not as exact as they could have been.
Technology has done little to improve nighttime reconnaissance of battle target damage. Infrared sensors on new types of radar reveal craters, but not much detail. The military has to wait for daylight to gauge the effectiveness of military strikes and to be sure mobile weapons haven't been moved. Aerospace experts say in the last 7 years, satellites have been fitted with new components that improve their ability to see through cloud cover and other adverse weather conditions. Perhaps the biggest advance since the Gulf War is in the delivery of tasking orders to aircraft carriers. That's the blueprint of how to carry out each sortie. During the Gulf War, reams and reams of paper orders had to be flown to the carriers. Now they're being sent with just a keystroke.
The technician just has to hit a button on a computer and can send the air tasking order directly to the aircraft carrier and other forces in the region. The air tasking order is basically a huge volume of targets.
The missions can be launched more quickly. The Iraqi defense system is still mostly low-tech, but experts say Saddam has managed to protect his military assets by improving his shell game of cover and deception. Steve Young, CNN Financial News, New York.
A NASA spacecraft is about to begin the first close-up study of an asteroid in orbit. The probe is called NEAR, short for Near-Earth Asteroid Rendezvous, and its target is the asteroid 433 Eros. On January 10th, NEAR will go into orbit around Eros and start a gradual descent toward the surface, taking pictures and readings and sending them back to Earth. Scientists hope to find out how dense the asteroid is and what minerals are on its surface. Asteroids could be a source of resources for future space travelers. Studying them could also suggest ways to deflect or destroy an asteroid headed toward Earth. And the makeup of asteroids could give new insight into how the universe formed. The Shuttle Endeavour is back on Earth after NASA's first flight to build the International Space Station. Crew members and NASA officials were jubilant over the accomplishments of the 12-day mission. As Miles O'Brien reports, the mission hit a few snags, but in most respects, it was smooth and successful.
Houston Endeavour, wheel stop.
Endeavour, welcome home. Bob, that was a beautiful landing.
With nearly 12 days and 5 million miles behind them, the crew of Endeavour hit the ground running, just as they did during their historic mission.
Range to Zarya now about.
Perhaps the hardest moments came early on when they rendezvoused with the first orbiting piece of the International Space Station, a Russian-built power plant called Zarya, or Sunrise. Lacking a direct line of sight, Commander Bob Cabana and robotic arm virtuoso Nancy Curry used TV cameras and other instruments to inch beside the 40,000-pound Zarya and then attach it to the first U.S. contribution to the space station, a connecting segment called Unity.
Houston Endeavour, we have capture of Zarya.
It actually seemed as hard as I thought it was going to be. We just took it nice and slow. Probably painfully slow, if you ask Bob, but took it nice and slow, and all the training paid off. It was.
The suspension's okay, isn't it?
But building the skeleton of the embryonic station was not enough. Spacewalkers Jerry Ross and Jim Newman ventured into the void to stitch together the station's nervous system. In addition to joining power and data cables, they attached antennas, bolted on handholds, and left a tool bag for future crews. During the complicated walks, Ross mistakenly let 3 parts float away. They weren't critical, but it was an embarrassing episode for NASA's most experienced spacewalker.
It was very regrettable circumstances that I lost those pieces of hardware. I'm not sure how it happened.
Setting up air ducting.
The crew also spent 2 days inside the new station, activating and installing equipment, attaching ductwork, and enjoying the extra inner space.
We kept pinching ourselves and saying, it can't be real. It's going so well, and everything is so right, and it just looks so good.
The end of this mission is really a beginning for NASA. It will take at least 35 more shuttle missions to build the million-pound International Space Station. NASA is girding for the unprecedented challenge ahead.
Eine kilometerhohe Asche- und Rauchwolke entstanden durch den Ausbruch des Vulkans, der unter dem Gletscher liegt. Wie bei einer Gewitterwolke entladen sich immer wieder elektrische Spannungen in gewaltigen Blitzen. Inzwischen lasse die Aktivität des Vulkans schon wieder nach, so Experten. Sichere Vorhersagen könne man aber nicht machen. Vor 2 Jahren hatte ein Vulkanausbruch in der Region zu schweren Überschwemmungen geführt.
Bei dem isländischen Vatnajökull-Gletscher stößt seit Tagen eine kilometerhohe Aschewolke in die Luft. Nach Angaben von Seismologen nimmt die Aktivität des unterirdischen Vulkans inzwischen wieder ab. In gewaltigen Blitzen entladen sich über Europas größtem Gletscher immer wieder elektrische Felder. Wegen des Ascheregens wurden die Bauern aufgefordert, ihr Vieh in den Ställen zu lassen. Für die Bevölkerung erwarten die Behörden keine größeren Schwierigkeiten.
It was a near disaster for the NEAR spacecraft this week. NEAR stands for Near Earth Asteroid Rendezvous. Mission controllers lost contact with the space probe that's en route to study an asteroid called 433 Eros. Communications were lost just as NEAR was attempting to fire its engines to catch up with Eros. The good news is the scientists re-established contact with NEAR late Monday. The bad news is the brief episode means NEAR will not rendezvous with the asteroid on January 10th as scheduled. Mission controllers are still in the process of figuring out what went wrong, but software problems seem to be to blame. They plan for NEAR to rendezvous with Eros around May 2000. It was another successful launch this week for Arianespace, the commercial arm of the European Space Agency. This rocket put a Pan-Am-Sat satellite into orbit over Brazil that will transmit television programs to Latin America. This was the 11th launch of an Ariane 4 rocket this year. Next year, Arianespace will start using the more powerful Ariane 5 rocket for commercial launches. And Ariane 5 was successfully launched in October after 2 previous failures.
Die ersten 10 Topol-M-Trägersysteme sind einsatzbereit. Sie werden je mit einem atomaren Sprengkopf bestückt. In einem Jahr sollen insgesamt 40 stationiert sein. Die Topol-M löst Systeme mit mehreren Sprengköpfen ab, die nach dem Start-2-Abkommen ausgemustert werden müssen.
Some 700 kilometers southeast of Moscow, the first battery of the new Topol-M missiles became operational Sunday. The head of Russia's strategic missile forces inaugurated the new base outside Tadashevo by saluting the record of Moscow's nuclear command complex.
One false alarm in 50 years. That is a pretty reliable system.
The new missile replaces the multiple warhead STS-88, banned by the 1993 START II disarmament treaty signed with the United States. Russia says it plans to field 40 Topol-Ms by the end of next year. But analysts say Moscow will need to build 1,500 of the single warhead missiles to keep up with the United States. That's one of the reasons the Duma has refused to ratify START II, even though President Boris Yeltsin has adhered to the terms of the treaty. Michael Skinner, CNN.
Classified report says the Chinese government is engaged in a conspiracy to obtain U.S. high technology and then use it to improve its military.
Based on unclassified information, I can tell you today that we have found that national security harm did occur.
The allegations in the 700-page report were unanimously approved by 5 Republicans and 4 Democrats. It focuses in part on 2 U.S. space and communications companies, Loral and Hughes Electronics. It concludes the companies gave technical assistance to the Chinese, which enhanced their military capabilities. Hughes and Loral used relatively cheap Chinese rockets to launch their satellites. Both companies are accused of helping the Chinese figure out why 2 of those launches failed in the 1990s. Critics say the assistance allowed the Chinese not only to improve satellite launch capabilities, but also their long-range missile program. But in a statement, Loral said, "We remain convinced that we did not violate the law and did nothing to harm national security." Hughes has previously denied wrongdoing as well. The committee found the Chinese effort to obtain U.S. technology dates back 20 years and goes well beyond Loral and Hughes. Congressional and Justice Department investigators have been probing Chinese efforts to transfer aircraft and computer technology as well.
These are serious problems that must be addressed by the administration and the Congress.
The classified report makes 38 recommendations, including some that would make it more difficult for the Chinese to obtain U.S. technology. That could have a chilling effect on U.S.-Chinese relations. Pierre Thomas, CNN, Washington.
1999 will bring the 30th anniversary of Neil Armstrong's first walk on the moon. But in terms of achievement, NASA says 1998 was a pretty good year, too. CNN's John Zarella takes a look at what's been a big year in space.
Testing futuristic technologies. Putting an American icon back in space.
And liftoff of Discovery with a crew of 6 astronaut heroes and 1 American legend.
Building the future and solidifying partnerships in the high frontier.
Endeavour Houston, at this range, you're safe.
For the U.S. Space Agency, 1998 may be remembered as NASA's best year since it put men on the moon.
98 was kind of a transition year to the future, but the future is very promising and very exciting.
In 1998, John Glenn linked the present to the past. Now the space station may link the present to the future. Glenn's mission generated nearly all the excitement. But space experts say history will see the launching of the first segments of the International Space Station as more significant.
I think fundamentally and in the long term, that station launch was a much more important event.
For many reasons, the Space Shuttle now has a place to go. The station is the first major test of a global space partnership: Europe, Japan, Canada, Russia, and the United States. It will also clarify whether there are true benefits to zero-gravity research and whether humans can survive long durations in space.
When people go to the space station in early 2000 to live, if you think about it, that may be our first and last step off this planet. From then on, people may be living off the Earth forever.
The year ahead could also provide a blockbuster event. A spacecraft will land on Mars looking for water, a key ingredient in the formation of life. Another will fly to a comet. Russia will decide whether to keep flying the space station Mir or let it fall back to Earth. And 1999 may answer fundamental questions. Can nations work together in space? And is there a real benefit to working in space? John Zarella, CNN, at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
The vastness of space to the tiny world of subatomic particles. From John Glenn to El Nino, 1998 brought some scientific surprises that could affect everyone's life. Let's take a quick look back at some of the highlights.
I don't think it's going to go anywhere because we've already got them tied down pretty tight on those things.
From the most expensive space project in history to the stunning contributions of a worm. The world of science and technology produced both marvels and mysteries in 1998.
For the first time, we have the complete instruction book, if you will, of an animal.
It took researchers 8 years to produce a detailed genetic blueprint of this worm, known as C. elegans. Even though it's only a distant cousin to humans, its DNA makeup gives scientists more insights into how our own bodies develop and why some people are more vulnerable to certain diseases.
No one's taking it seriously enough.
In 1998, many began to worry about a threat that could disrupt everything from travel to banking when the next new year rolls around. The so-called millennium bug could paralyze computers that aren't programmed to read the year 2000. Experts doubt all computers with the bug can be fixed in time. Computers were paralyzed for another reason in 98, bumper-to-bumper traffic jams in cyberspace. In 98, the masses converged on the internet, but information slowed to a trickle when everyone headed to the same sites.
Your browser will sit there spinning for a little while. You just have to wait a little while to get service.
Millions turned from their TVs to their PCs to learn about President Clinton's relationship with Monica Lewinsky. And 40% of people with computers made at least one purchase online, increasing online shopping 3 times that of 1997. The government started a trial that could put the brakes on Microsoft's phenomenal growth and what many see as a monopoly.
He's really out to destroy Microsoft.
While Microsoft's Bill Gates, upset with a government lawyer, denies the software giant used unfair tactics to crush the competition.
Sergey's bouncing off the walls.
In December, spacewalkers joined the first Russian and U.S. portions of an international space station. In all, 16 nations are building the massive space laboratory.
We need the space station because if we're ever going to live anywhere besides on Earth, this is our step to doing that.
4, 3, 2, 1.
When I heard John Glenn was going up, my reaction was, go senior.
John Glenn's return to space after a 36-year hiatus was a small step for the study of older astronauts. and a giant leap for NASA public relations.
And this is getting deeper blue, indicating it's getting colder and colder there.
In late spring, the warmth of El Nino was replaced by the cold Pacific waters of La Nina. Both contributed to a year of peculiar global weather. La Nina's most devastating legacy, a busy and deadly Atlantic hurricane season.
The neutrino is the least understood and the most abundant in the universe.
Subatomic particles known as neutrinos were once thought to be just flashes of energy. But the discovery in Japan that these particles have mass could alter scientists' theories of just how the universe has been changing since the Big Bang. Perhaps a mystery to be solved next year.
One, we have booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour with the first American element of the International Space Station, uniting our efforts in space to achieve our common goals.
Roll program. Houston Endeavour, we have capture of Zarya. We kept pinching ourselves and saying, it can't be real. It's going so well, and everything is so right, and it just looks so good.
After waiting 36 years, John Glenn's dream to return to space has come true.
4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of Discovery with a crew of 6 astronaut heroes and 1 American legend.
I feel like a kid at his first Christmas. I'm very excited about this.
This is literally a flying laboratory that is doing so many things. We have 83 projects on board that just are doing so many things that benefit the people on Earth. In fact, that's what the flights now are all about.
Main gear touchdown.